They sent me to Charles Blakemore's office as a joke, the mafia boss who made men disappear for looking at him wrong. But when I pushed that door open and saw him standing there, covered in rage and broken glass, something happened that no one expected. He refused to let me leave. If you're ready to enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us in creating more amazing stories, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's jump right into the story. The mansion's kitchen smelled like lemon polish and cruelty. I sat in the corner, folding linens with trembling hands, trying to make myself invisible. It never worked. 5 maids clustered around the marble counter, their laughter sharp as broken glass. They spoke in whispers meant to carry, glancing toward me with eyes full of malice. "Someone needs to clean Mr. Blakemore's office," the head maid announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The room went silent. Charles Blakemore's office. The place no one entered without a summons. The place where men walked in confident and walked out broken if they walked out at all. "He shattered a whiskey glass against the wall last week," one maid whispered. "Nearly took a guard's eye out. Burned a contract in his bare hands," another added. "Didn't even flinch." "My cousin works for the Moretti family. She said Charles once made a man disappear for looking at him wrong." I kept my head down, folding faster. They all knew the stories. Charles Blakemore, the mafia don who ruled the city's underworld with ice-cold precision. A man who spoke in bullets and silence. A man whose temper could raise empires. And now someone had to clean his office. "Who's brave enough to volunteer?" the head maid asked. No one moved. Then, slowly, all eyes turned toward me. I kept folding, my hands moving methodically, trying to disappear into the fabric the way I'd learned to survive. My uniform hung loose on my thin frame. My dark hair was pulled back, so tight it made my head ache. "Agnes," the head maid called, too sweetly. My hands stilled. My stomach dropped. "You're not busy tomorrow, are you?" I shook my head slowly, my throat closing. "Perfect." She smiled like a wolf. "You'll clean Mr. Blakemore's office. 7 sharp." I can't," I whispered. "Why not? You clean here, don't you? But no one's allowed." "Exactly." Another maid stepped closer, circling me like a predator. "Which is why it's so funny." The others erupted in laughter. "Look at her," someone whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's shaking already. He'll eat her alive." 5 minutes. That's how long she'll last. Maybe he'll throw her through the window. Wouldn't that be a sight? My hands trembled in my lap. I kept my eyes down, trying to disappear into the linens, into the floor, into nothing. "It's settled then," the head maid said, tossing a brass key onto my pile of folded sheets. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And Agnes. She leaned in close, her breath hot on my cheek. "When he destroys you, don't come crying back here." They dispersed, already moving on to the next piece of gossip, the next victim. I sat alone in the corner, the brass key cold in my shaking palm. I wanted to refuse, to say no, to run. But where would I go? No family, no money, no references. The mansion was all I had, this job, this uniform, this tiny servant's room in the attic. If the head housekeeper found out I'd refused work, I'd be on the street by nightfall. So I pocketed the key, climbed the narrow back stairs to my room, and lay awake all night staring at the cracked ceiling. Built for others to break, the voices echoed in my mind. Forgettable, worthless, weak. I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling my heartbeat, and whispered into the darkness, "Why am I always the joke?" No answer came. Just the sound of wind rattling the old window frames. Dawn broke cold and gray. I dressed in my plainest uniform, tied my hair back with a fraying ribbon, and slipped out of the servants' quarters before the others woke. The walk to the east wing felt like walking to my execution. Each step echoed too loud. Each breath came too shallow. My hands clutched a polishing cloth like a shield, like it could protect me from what waited behind that door. The hallways stretched endlessly. Dark wood panels. Oil paintings of stern-faced men. And at the end, the door.
Heavy.
Mahogany.
Locked.
My hand trembled as I inserted the brass key. Then I heard it. A crash from inside. Glass shattering. A voice. Deep, furious, lethal. Useless. All of it. Another crash. I froze, my hand on the doorknob, every instinct screaming to run. Through the crack in the door, I could see him. Charles Blakemore. Broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit like armor, tattoos curling up his neck like smoke. He gripped a crystal decanter and hurled it across the room. It exploded against the wall, whiskey streaming down like blood. He stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched, jaw tight enough to shatter stone. This was the man they'd sent me to, the devil in a suit, the king of violence. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to cease existing. But then he turned. His eyes locked on mine, winter steel, sharp, unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Charles spoke, his voice low and rough as gravel. "Who sent you?" My mouth opened. The words tangled, caught in my throat. I was told to clean, sir." His eyes narrowed, studying me. Not like prey, like a puzzle. "They sent you." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. My cheeks burned.
I knew what he saw.
What everyone saw.
Small.
Frightened. Powerless. A joke. Charles turned away, running a hand through his dark hair. "Go home." I blinked. "What?" I said, "Go home. I don't need cleaning from someone they sent as a prank." My chest tightened. I should leave. Should thank him and run. But then I thought of the kitchen. The laughter. The cruelty. And the head housekeeper's warning. No work, no bed. My voice came out stronger than I expected. "I need the work." Charles stopped. Slowly, he turned back to face me. "You need it," he repeated, voice flat. "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, something flickering in those cold eyes. Then he pointed toward a cleaning cart by the wall.
"Fine.
"You want to work? Then work. Don't talk. Don't touch anything on the desk. And stay out of my way." I nodded quickly, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Charles returned to his desk, jaw still tight, anger still simmering beneath the surface. I picked up the cloth and began to dust. And for the first time in my life, I didn't run from danger. I stood in it. I am Agnes Pratt, the quiet maid everyone in the mansion mocks for being timid, clumsy, and forgettable. The cloth moved across the mahogany bookshelf in small, careful circles. I focused on the rhythm, wipe, breathe, anything to keep my hands from shaking, to keep my mind from spiraling into the terror clawing at my chest. "Don't drop anything. Don't make noise. Don't look at him." Charles Blakemore sat behind his massive desk, silent as a coiled snake. I could feel his presence like a weight pressing against my spine, even with my back turned. The office smelled like leather, expensive cigars, and something darker. Gunpowder, maybe. Or blood. I moved to the next shelf, dusting crystal decanters that probably cost more than I'd earn in a year. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale, wide-eyed, terrified. "You're going to survive this," I told myself.
"Just clean.
Just finish. Just breathe." Then his phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, like a gunshot. I flinched, nearly dropping the cloth. Charles answered without greeting. "Talk." His voice had changed. Colder.
Sharper.
The kind of cold that froze blood. I kept dusting, slower now, quieter, trying to disappear into the walls. "A territory breach," Charles said, his tone lethal.
"How?"
Silence as he listened. My hands trembled against the shelf. "Find him." Charles's voice dropped to a growl. "I don't care where he's hiding. I don't care who's protecting him. There's a traitor in my organization, and blood will spill before sunrise." I stopped breathing.
"No."
"No mercy. No negotiations."
He paused.
"Make it hurt." The phone slammed down. I stood frozen, cloth pressed against a bookshelf I'd already cleaned twice. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Don't turn around. Don't look."
don't exist.
But I couldn't help it. My eyes flicked toward the desk. And there it was. A gun. Black. Heavy. Sitting on a stack of papers like it belonged there. Like it was just another office supply. My stomach turned. My knees went weak. This wasn't just a dangerous man. This was a killer. A man who ordered torture over the phone the way others ordered coffee. And I was alone in his office. The cloth slipped from my shaking fingers. It fell in slow motion, hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud that echoed like thunder. I froze.
No.
No, no, no. My breath caught. My vision blurred. Every muscle in my body screamed to run. But I couldn't move.
Couldn't think.
He's going to kill me. He's going to pick up that gun. And, what's your name? His voice cut through my panic. I turned slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Charles wasn't holding the gun. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me with those winter steel eyes. Not angry, just curious. My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. I swallowed hard, tried again. Agnes. Agnes, he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. I nodded, unable to form words, waiting for the rage, the threat, the violence everyone had warned me about. But he just nodded back.
Once. Slowly.
Pick up your cloth, Agnes. I dropped to my knees, grabbing the cloth with trembling hands, my face burning with humiliation.
Clumsy.
Stupid. Worthless. I returned to the bookshelf, my legs shaking so badly I thought they might give out. But I kept cleaning, kept moving, kept breathing. Charles returned to his paperwork, pen scratching across documents. The tension in the room shifted, still dangerous, but no longer explosive. I was halfway through dusting the window ledge when the door burst open. A guard stepped in, tall, muscular, with a scar running down his jaw. He stopped when he saw me, his face twisting with confusion and contempt. Who the hell let the maid in here? He sneered, looking at me like I was vermin that had crawled out of the walls. My blood turned to ice. This is it. This is when I get thrown out.
Punished.
Broken. I opened my mouth to apologize, to explain, to beg. I did. Charles didn't even look up from his papers. His voice was calm, flat, final. The guard froze. Sir? I let her in. Charles signed a document, set down his pen, and finally looked up. His gaze locked on the guard, cold and absolute. Is that a problem? The guard's face paled.
No, sir.
No problem.
Good.
Then get out. The guard backed toward the door, casting one last confused glance at me before disappearing into the hallway. The door clicked shut. Silence. I stood there, cloth pressed against my chest, my heart still racing. Charles Blakemore, the man who ordered blood spilled without hesitation, had just defended me.
Me.
The joke. The target. The invisible maid. You're dismissed, Charles said, returning to his papers. Same time tomorrow. I nodded quickly, gathering my cleaning supplies with shaking hands. I moved toward the door, each step feeling surreal, like walking through a dream. My hand touched the doorknob. Agnes. I stopped, turned. Charles was watching me again, his expression unreadable. You didn't run. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. Maybe even respect? I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and slipped out the door. The hallway hit me like a physical force. 5 maids stood clustered near the servants' entrance, their faces frozen in shock. The head maid's mouth hung open. Another dropped the tray she was holding, porcelain shattering against marble. They'd been waiting for me to be carried out. Or to not come out at all. But I walked past them, head down, cleaning supplies clutched in my arms.
Alive.
Untouched. Summoned to return tomorrow. Their stunned silence followed me all the way down the hall. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. The gossip spread through the mansion like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew. The invisible maid had entered Charles Blakemore's office and walked out alive. Not just alive, summoned to return. I kept my head down through dinner service, moving between the kitchen and dining hall like a ghost. But I could feel their eyes on me, hear the whispers that cut sharper than knives. How did she survive? What did she do in there? Maybe she's not as innocent as she pretends. I scrubbed dishes until my hands were raw, trying to focus on the hot water, the soap, the rhythm of cleaning. Anything to drown out the poison in their voices. But the mansion had never been kind to me. And now it was angry. The next morning, I woke before dawn to find my uniform shredded. Long tears ran through the fabric, deliberate and cruel. My spare was missing from the shared closet. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I'd learned long ago that tears only made them laugh harder. I mended the tears as best I could with shaking hands, the stitches uneven and obvious. When I looked in the cracked mirror, I saw exactly what they wanted me to see. Someone broken, pathetic, barely holding together. I made my way to the servants' dining hall for breakfast, my stomach hollow with hunger. The moment I stepped through the doorway, silence crashed down like a wave. 20 staff members sat at the long wooden tables. Every single one of them turned to stare. I kept my eyes down, moving toward the corner where I always sat alone. But the head maid stood, blocking my path. Well, well. Her voice dripped with venom. The golden girl returns. The others snickered. I tried to step around her, but 2 more maids rose, boxing me in. My pulse quickened. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Excuse me," one mocked in a high, trembling voice. More laughter. The head maid circled me slowly, like a predator. "We're all just dying to know, Agnes. What did you do to make Mr. Blakemore keep you?" My cheeks burned. I just cleaned. Just cleaned," she repeated, her smile sharp.
Right.
"Because Charles Blakemore, the most feared man in the city, just loves having clumsy little maids in his private office." Maybe she begged. Another maid offered. Got on her knees and cried. Maybe she offered him something else. A third added, her tone ugly. My stomach twisted. "I didn't." "You didn't what?" The head maid stepped closer, her face inches from mine. "Didn't ruin our prank? Didn't make us look like fools? Didn't somehow survive when you should have been thrown out or worse?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. "You're nothing, Agnes." Her voice dropped to a hiss. "A charity case. A stray we let sleep in the attic out of pity. You have no family, no skills, no value. You're less than nothing." Each word landed like a physical blow. I wanted to fight back, to defend myself, to scream that I'd done nothing wrong. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. "Look at her," someone laughed. "Can't even speak. Pathetic. Waste of space." The head maid leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. "Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends now. Stay away from Mr. Blakemore's office. Stay away from him, or we'll make sure you regret it." She shoved me backward. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. The room erupted in laughter. I stood there, my vision blurring, my hands pressed flat against the cold stone. Every part of me wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. "You're nothing. 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 Is there a problem here?" The laughter died instantly. Every head turned toward the doorway. Charles Blakemore stood at the entrance to the servants' hall, filling the frame with his presence. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, his expression carved from ice. The tattoo at his throat seemed darker in the morning light, like smoke, like warning. No one moved. No one breathed. His eyes swept the room, cataloging every face, before landing on me pressed against the wall, uniform torn, face flushed with humiliation. Something flickered in his expression. Not pity. Something harder. Sharper. Recognition. Like he'd seen this scene before. Like he knew exactly what had happened. The head maid stepped forward, her voice suddenly sweet. "Mr. Blakemore, sir. We were just—" "I didn't ask you." His voice cut like a blade. She fell silent, her face paling. Charles's gaze returned to me. "Agnes." I straightened, my heart hammering. "Why, yes, sir." "My office. Same time tomorrow." It wasn't a question. It was a command. But something in his tone was different. Protective, almost. Like he was drawing a line in the sand and daring anyone to cross it. I nodded quickly, not trusting my voice. Charles's eyes swept the room one more time, a warning without words. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. The moment he disappeared, the servants exploded into frantic whispers. Did you see? Why would he?
Twice.
He's summoned her twice. What's happening? The head maid's face twisted with fury and something else, fear. She shot me a look of pure venom before stalking out of the hall, the other maids scattering behind her. I stood alone against the wall, my legs shaking, my hands still trembling. But something had shifted inside me. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, my uniform was torn and my reputation shredded. Yes, they'd humiliated me again. But Charles Blakemore, the most dangerous man in the city, had walked into a room full of people who wanted to break me, and he'd chosen me anyway. He'd seen me pressed against the wall, surrounded by cruelty, and he hadn't looked away. He'd summoned me back. I pushed off the wall, straightened my torn uniform as much as I could, and walked out of the servants' hall with my head just a fraction higher. Tomorrow I would return to his office. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as they wanted me to believe. For the first time in my life, I felt something unfamiliar burning in my chest. Not just fear.
Pride.
I arrived at his office door at exactly 7 o'clock, my hand trembling as I raised it to knock. Before my knuckles touched wood, his voice came from inside. Come in, Agnes. He'd been waiting, listening for my footsteps. I pushed the door open, my cleaning supplies clutched against my chest like armor. Charles sat behind his desk, paperwork spread before him like a battlefield. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me beyond those 2 words. Just continued reading, pen scratching across documents with sharp, precise strokes. Same as yesterday, he said, his tone flat. Don't touch the desk. Yes, sir. I moved to the far side of the office and began dusting the bookshelves. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. But it wasn't the cruel silence of the servants' hall. This was different. Focused. Like he was aware of every movement I made, cataloging it, filing it away. I watched him from the corner of my eye as I worked. Charles Blakemore moved like a predator, even when sitting still. Every gesture was controlled, economical. No wasted motion. When he reached for a document, his hand moved with precision. When he shifted in his chair, it was deliberate, calculated. Violence wrapped in expensive silk. A lion pretending to be a man. I moved to the windows, polishing the glass until it gleamed. Sunlight streamed through, cutting across his desk, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts. For almost an hour, we existed in that strange silence, him working, me cleaning, both pretending the other wasn't there. Then his phone rang. Charles answered without looking up. Yes. His entire body went rigid. I froze mid-wipe, cloth pressed against the window. What do you mean, compromised? His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Silence as he listened. I could see his jaw tightening, muscles coiling beneath his skin like springs about to snap. How many? More silence. And you're just telling me this now? The temperature in the room plummeted. I slowly lowered my cloth, moving toward the bookshelf, trying to make myself invisible, trying not to breathe too loud. I want names. I want locations. And I want blood. He paused.
No.
Not tomorrow. Tonight. He slammed the phone down. Then, in one violent motion, he swept his arm across the desk. A crystal glass flew through the air, shattering against the wall 3 feet from where I stood. I flinched, my heart stopping. Shards of glass exploded across the floor like ice. Water streamed down the wallpaper, leaving dark trails. Charles stood, his chair scraping back, his hands braced against the desk. His shoulders heaved with barely contained rage. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with each breath. I should have run. Should have hidden. But I'd seen this rage before. Not this violent, not this powerful, but I'd seen what happens when fury has nowhere to go. I'd seen how it burns until there's nothing left. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. I set down my cleaning supplies, grabbed a fresh cloth and the water pitcher from the side table, and slowly, carefully, walked toward his desk. Every step felt like walking toward a wild animal. My pulse thundered in my ears. My hands shook so badly the water sloshed in the pitcher. But I kept moving. I stopped a few feet from the desk, close enough to reach, but far enough to run if I needed to. Then I gently placed the cloth and pitcher on the corner of his desk. Charles's head snapped toward me, his eyes blazing with fury. I stepped back quickly, my breath catching. We stared at each other across that impossible distance. His chest still heaved. His fists were still clenched. But something in his expression shifted, confusion breaking through rage like sunlight through storm clouds. He looked down at the cloth and water, then back at me. I couldn't read his face. Couldn't tell if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or, "Thank you." The words came out rough, barely audible. But they were there. Charles sank back into his chair slowly, like a lion settling after a hunt. He picked up the cloth, pressed it against his forehead, and closed his eyes. I stood frozen, my heart still racing, unable to believe what had just happened. His rage had stopped. Because of me. I returned to the window, picking up my cleaning supplies with trembling hands. But I could feel the shift in the room. Something had changed. Something I didn't have words for. I was kneeling to sweep up the broken glass when the door burst open. A man strode in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of arrogant authority. A lieutenant, judging by the way he carried himself. He stopped when he saw me crouched on the floor, his lip curling with disgust. "What's she doing here?" He spoke about me like I was furniture. Less than furniture. My hands stilled on the dustpan. Charles didn't look up from his papers.
Cleaning.
"In your private office?" The lieutenant scoffed. "Charles, she's a maid. Get rid of her. Use the regular staff."
No.
The single word landed like a gunshot. The lieutenant blinked.
What? She stays.
Charles finally looked up, his gaze cold and absolute. "Is there something you actually need, Marcus? Or did you come here to question how I run my office?" Marcus's face paled. "I know, sir. I just thought." "Don't." Charles returned to his paperwork. "If you have business, discuss it. If not, get out." Marcus glanced at me once more, his expression caught between confusion and fury, before turning on his heel and leaving. The door clicked shut. Silence. I finished sweeping the glass, my hands steadier now, my breathing slower. "She stays." 2 words, but they felt like armor. I'd spent my entire life being told I was nothing. Invisible. A burden. A joke. But Charles Blakemore, a man who commanded empires with a word, who inspired fear with a glance, had looked a lieutenant in the eye and chosen me. Not because I was useful. Not because I was valuable. Just because. I emptied the dustpan, returned to the bookshelf, and continued cleaning. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt seen. Not as a target. Not as a joke. As a person. Someone worth defending. The 3rd day, Charles asked me a question. "Do you take sugar in your tea?" I looked up from polishing the brass lamp, my cloth frozen mid-circle. He sat at his desk, not looking at me, still reading through a stack of documents covered in numbers and names I couldn't decipher. What? "Sugar. In tea." He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Do you take it?" Yes, sir. 1 spoonful." He nodded once and returned to his papers. 20 minutes later, a housemaid I'd never seen before knocked softly and entered with a silver tray. 2 cups of tea. She set one on Charles's desk, then, to my complete shock, brought the other to me. "Mr. Blakemore's orders, miss," she whispered, her eyes wide with confusion before she quickly left. I stared at the delicate porcelain cup in my hands. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of bergamot. 1 sugar, exactly as I'd said. Charles hadn't looked up from his work. "Thank you, sir," I whispered. "Don't let it get cold." It was the most normal conversation I'd had in years. The fourth day, I learned what his world truly looked like. Charles had been on the phone for an hour, his voice low and lethal. I cleaned quietly, trying not to listen, but some words cut through anyway. Betrayal. Warehouse fire. Make an example. When he finally hung up, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. That's when I saw his hands. Bruised knuckles.
Fresh.
The kind of bruising that came from hitting something or someone repeatedly. Dark purple spreading across his right hand, split skin barely scabbed over. My stomach turned, but not with fear. With something else. Something I didn't have a name for. He caught me staring. I don't apologize for what I am, Agnes. I know, sir. Does it frighten you? He asked it like he was asking about the weather.
Casual.
But his eyes were sharp, watching for my reaction. I should have lied. Should have said no, I wasn't frightened at all. But something in his gaze demanded truth. Yes, I whispered. But not the way you think. His eyebrow raised slightly. How then? I struggled for words. I'm frightened of your world. The violence.
The blood.
But not you. Not exactly. Not exactly, he repeated, almost amused. You're dangerous, I continued, surprising myself with my honesty. But you've never been cruel to me. Everyone else has. But not you. Charles studied me for a long moment. Then he turned back to his papers. Finish the bookshelf, he said quietly. But I'd seen something in his expression before he turned away. Surprise. Maybe even respect. The fifth day, I noticed the exhaustion. Charles arrived at his office an hour late, his suit slightly rumpled, something I'd never seen before. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His jaw was tight with tension that seemed carved into his bones. He worked through lunch, barely touching the food brought to him. His movements were slower, heavier, like he was carrying weight invisible to everyone else. I wanted to ask if he was all right, but I didn't dare. Instead, I made his tea the way he took it, black, no sugar, and placed it quietly on the corner of his desk. You don't have to do that, he said without looking up. I know, sir. He took a sip, then another. Some of the tension eased from his shoulders. Agnes. Yes, sir? Do you know what I did last night? My hand stilled on the dusting cloth. No, sir.
Good.
He set down the cup. Don't ask. Don't wonder. Don't let yourself imagine. I won't, sir. But I already had. And what I'd imagined was a man doing terrible things for terrible reasons in a world built on blood and shadows. A man who carried the weight of an empire on shoulders that never got to rest. Not a monster. Just a man. Exhausted. Alone. Doing what he believed he had to do. The sixth day, my hair ribbon came loose. I was reaching up to dust the top shelf when I felt it slip, my dark hair falling around my shoulders in a tangled mess. I grabbed for the ribbon, but it fluttered to the floor. Damn, I whispered, then immediately covered my mouth. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Agnes. I turned. Charles stood behind me.
Close.
Closer than he'd ever been. He bent down, picked up the ribbon, and straightened. We stood there, barely 3 feet apart. I could see the flecks of gray in his dark hair, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his jaw worked like he was making some kind of decision. Then, without a word, he gestured for me to turn around. I did, my heart hammering. His hands gathered my hair gently, surprisingly gentle for hands that had broken bones and pulled triggers. He tied the ribbon with careful precision, his fingers barely brushing my neck. There, he said quietly. I turned back, my face burning. Thank you. He was already walking back to his desk. Your hair was in your eyes. Couldn't have you falling off a ladder. Of course, sir. But we both knew it was more than that. That night, lying in my narrow attic bed, I replayed the moment over and over. His hands in my hair. The gentleness.
The care.
Charles Blakemore, the Mafia don who commanded empires, had fixed my hair ribbon. The same hands that had bruised knuckles and blood on them had touched me with kindness. The servants' hall still mocked me. The maids still whispered cruel things. The head housekeeper still looked at me with disgust. But Charles saw something different. And slowly, terrifyingly, I was starting to see it too. I wasn't the invisible maid anymore. Wasn't the joke, the target, the nothing. I was someone who brought him tea. Someone who cleaned his sanctuary. Someone whose hair ribbon he fixed when it came loose. Someone he chose to keep. I pressed my hands to my chest, feeling my heartbeat strong and steady, and whispered into the darkness. Maybe I am not weak. The words felt like truth, like possibility, like the beginning of something I'd never dared imagine before. Courage. They came for me on the 7th day. I was in the servants' corridor, carrying fresh linens to the storage closet, when the head housekeeper stepped out from the shadows. Behind her stood Mr. Pemberton, the head butler, a tall, severe man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. My stomach dropped. Agnes Pratt. The housekeeper's voice was formal, clipped. You're to come with us. Now. I have to finish.
Now.
Mr. Pemberton moved to block my path back toward the main house. They flanked me on both sides, herding me toward the rear stairwell like guards escorting a prisoner. My pulse hammered. What's happening? What did I do? What did you do? The housekeeper laughed, sharp and cruel. You've made a mockery of this household's order. You've overstepped your position. I've just been cleaning, I whispered, my voice shaking. You've been manipulating Mr. Blakemore, Mr. Pemberton said coldly. Playing some game. Making him believe you're something you're not. We reached the housekeeper's office, a small, stark room that smelled of old paper and judgment. She shut the door behind us with a decisive click. Sit. I remained standing, my hands clutching the linens against my chest like a shield. I said sit. The housekeeper's voice cracked like a whip. I sank into the wooden chair, my legs trembling. Mr. Pemberton crossed his arms, looming over me. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow.
What?
No, You've been assigned duties above your station, the housekeeper continued. You've been granted access to private areas. You've disrupted the household hierarchy. This behavior is unacceptable. But Mr. Blakemore told me to. Mr. Blakemore, she interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain, is a busy man with more important concerns than a scheming little maid who's gotten ideas above her station. I'm not scheming. The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. I've only done what I was told. I clean his office. That's all. That's all. Mr. Pemberton leaned down, his face inches from mine. Charles Blakemore doesn't invite maids to his private office. He doesn't ask for specific staff. He doesn't defend servants to his lieutenants. But somehow, you've managed all three. My face burned. I didn't ask for any of that. Perhaps not. But you've taken advantage of it. The housekeeper pulled a document from her desk drawer. This is your termination notice. Sign it.
No.
The word came out stronger than I expected. Steadier. Both of them stared at me. What did you say? The housekeeper's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. I haven't done anything wrong. I've cleaned what I was told to clean. I've worked where I was told to work. I've followed every order. You insolent little. I won't sign. My voice cracked, but I held firm. I haven't broken any rules. Mr. Pemberton's face darkened. You'll sign, or you'll be removed by force. Either way, you're leaving this mansion today. They moved toward me. Panic exploded in my chest. I stood quickly, the chair scraping back. Please, I need this job. I have nowhere else to. Should have thought of that before you seduced your way into Mr. Blakemore's good graces, the housekeeper hissed. I didn't seduce anyone. My voice rose, desperate. I just cleaned. Mr. Pemberton grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. Enough. You're coming with us. No, please. He dragged me toward the door. I tried to pull free, but he was too strong. The housekeeper opened the door, revealing the hallway that led to the servants' exit, the door that led to the street, to nothing, to homelessness. Wait. I struggled against his grip. Please, just let me explain. There's nothing to explain, the housekeeper said coldly. You're finished here. Mr. Pemberton hauled me into the hallway. My feet scrambled for purchase on the marble floor. Other servants pressed against the walls, watching with wide eyes and hungry expressions. The exit was 20 feet away. 15. 10. No. I gasped, tears burning my eyes. Please, I need. Pemberton. The voice froze everyone in place.
Cold.
Lethal. Absolutely furious. Charles Blakemore stood at the end of the hallway, his hands in his pockets, his expression carved from ice. But his eyes burned with a rage that made the air crackle. Mr. Pemberton's grip on my arm loosened slightly. Mr. Blakemore, sir. You were just what? Charles walked toward us with measured, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed like a death knell. Removing one of my staff without my permission? The housekeeper stepped forward, her voice placating. Sir, this maid has overstepped. Has she? Charles stopped 5 feet away. His gaze swept over me, arm still trapped in Mr. Pemberton's grip, face streaked with tears, uniform wrinkled from struggling. Something flickered in his expression. Something dangerous. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've overstepped. We were only maintaining household order. Agnes works for me. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. She answers to me. Not you. Not him. Me. But sir.
Let
Her.
go.
Mr. Pemberton released my arm like I'd caught fire. I stumbled back, catching myself against the wall. Charles's gaze never left the butler. Touch her again, and you'll regret it. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The hallway had gone completely silent. Every servant, every maid, every guard within earshot stood frozen, barely breathing. The housekeeper's face had gone pale. Mr. Blakemore, we were only trying to protect your interests. By firing my cleaning staff, his tone could have cut glass. By manhandling a woman half your size? By making decisions about my household without consulting me? You thought wrong. He turned to me, his expression softening, just barely.
Agnes.
My office.
Now.
I nodded quickly, my throat too tight for words. As for you two. Charles turned back to the housekeeper and butler. If I hear about anyone harassing her, threatening her, or so much as looking at her wrong, you'll both be looking for new employment. Are we clear? Yes, sir, they said in unison, their voices small.
Good.
Get out of my sight. They scattered like leaves in a storm. Charles gestured for me to walk ahead of him. I moved on shaking legs, acutely aware of his presence behind me. Protective, solid, unwavering. The whispers erupted the moment we turned the corner. We walked in silence through the mansion's corridors, past shocked faces and open mouths. When we reached his office, he opened the door and waited for me to enter first. I stepped inside, my whole body trembling. Charles closed the door, then turned to face me. Are you hurt? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Did he bruise your arm? I looked down. Purple marks were already forming where Mr. Pemberton had grabbed me. It's fine. It's not fine.
His jaw tightened.
But it will be handled. We stood there in his office, the same room where this had all begun, where a cruel joke had turned into something else entirely. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. Charles tilted his head slightly. Why what? Why did you defend me? I'm just a maid. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Agnes. The words hit me like a wave. You work hard. You don't complain. You don't gossip. You make my tea without being asked. He paused, something unreadable crossing his face. You see me as a person, not a weapon. Do you know how rare that is? I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. So no, Charles continued quietly. You're not nobody. And you're not just a maid. You work for me now. And I protect what's mine. What's mine? The words echoed in my chest, warm and terrifying and impossible. He didn't just allow me in his office. He didn't just tolerate me. He chose me, and he would burn down anyone who tried to take that choice away. The gunshots came just after midnight. I jolted awake in my attic bed, heart hammering. 3 sharp cracks, then silence. Then shouting. Men's voices, harsh and urgent. More gunshots, rapid and chaotic. I pressed myself against the wall, pulling my thin blanket up to my chin. The mansion erupted with movement. Footsteps thundered through hallways. Doors slammed. Someone screamed. Then silence again, thick, suffocating silence that felt worse than the noise. I stayed frozen in my bed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I heard it. A single set of footsteps in the corridor below. Heavy. Uneven. Moving with purpose toward the east wing. Toward Charles's office. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I threw off the blanket, pulled on my robe over my nightgown, and crept down the narrow attic stairs. The mansion felt different in the dark. Shadows stretched across marble floors like reaching fingers. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder. I shouldn't go to him. I should stay hidden, stay safe, stay invisible the way I'd always been. But my feet carried me forward anyway. When I reached his office door, I found it slightly ajar. Warm light spilled through the crack. I heard movement inside, something being knocked over, a sharp intake of breath, a muttered curse. I pushed the door open. Charles stood by his desk, one hand braced against the wood, the other pressed to his side. His white shirt was torn and stained dark with blood, some fresh, some already drying. A cut above his eyebrow dripped red down his temple. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He looked up when I entered, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his face. Agnes. His voice was rough. What are you doing here? I heard. I couldn't finish the sentence. My eyes were locked on the blood seeping between his fingers where he pressed aside. Go back to your room. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I've had worse. He straightened, wincing. This isn't something you need to see. But I was already moving toward him, my hands steady despite the fear coursing through me. Sit down. Agnes.
Please.
I met his eyes. Just please sit down. Something in my tone made him obey. He sank into his chair with a barely suppressed groan, his hand still pressed to his side. I grabbed the water pitcher from the side table and a stack of clean cloths I'd left there earlier. My hands didn't shake as I approached him. They should have. Everything about this moment should have terrified me. But it didn't. Let me see, I said quietly. Charles hesitated, then slowly removed his hand from his side. The shirt was soaked through, torn where something, a knife, maybe, or broken glass, had cut through fabric and skin. It's not deep, he said. Looks worse than it is. I dampened a cloth and began cleaning the wound carefully. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rival family. Thought they could make a move on my territory. His jaw tightened. They were wrong. I worked in silence, cleaning the blood, assessing the damage. He was right, it wasn't deep. A long gash across his ribs, painful, but not life-threatening. I folded a clean cloth and pressed it against the wound. Hold this, I instructed. He complied, his eyes never leaving my face. I moved to the cut above his eyebrow next, standing close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. The warmth of violence, adrenaline, survival. I dabbed at the wound gently, cleaning away the blood. You should run, Charles said quietly. I paused, cloth hovering near his temple. What? From me? From this? He gestured vaguely with his free hand. You heard the gunshots. You see the blood. You know what I am. What I do. I resumed cleaning the cut. I know, and yet you're here, in the middle of the night, cleaning my wounds like it's the most natural thing in the world. It is natural, I said softly. You're hurt. I'm helping. Most people would run. I'm not most people. A ghost of a smile touched his lips.
No.
You're not. I finished with his eyebrow and moved to his hands. His knuckles were a mess, split skin, bruising, what looked like glass embedded in two of them. This will hurt, I warned. I can handle it. I removed the glass carefully, cleaning each wound with gentle precision. His hands were so much larger than mine.
Scarred.
Dangerous. Hands that had killed tonight, probably. Hands that had defended territory with brutal efficiency. But they didn't shake as I held them. Didn't pull away. "You don't flinch from me," Charles said suddenly, his voice quiet. Wondering. I looked up, meeting his eyes. They were softer than I'd ever seen them. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't thought possible. "Should I?" I asked. Most people do. Even my own men. They see the violence, the blood, the things I'm capable of. They see a monster. I set down the cloth and took his hand in both of mine. His blood stained my fingers, warm and real. "I don't see a monster," I said quietly. "I see a man who's tired. A man who carries weight no one else can see. A man who—" I hesitated, then pushed forward. "A man who fixed my hair ribbon when it came loose.
Who orders tea for me?
Who defended me when I couldn't defend myself. Agnes. Everyone deserves someone who sees them." I continued, my voice stronger now. "Not what they do. Not what they're forced to be. Just them. The person underneath." Charles stared at me, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "And you see me?" His voice was barely audible. "Yes." "Even covered in blood?" "Especially then." I squeezed his hand gently. "Because that's when you need someone most. When the world sees the monster and forgets the man." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The office was silent except for our breathing, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant settling of the mansion. Then Charles lifted his free hand and cupped my cheek. His palm was warm, calloused, stained with blood and violence. But his touch was gentle, reverent almost. "How are you real?" he whispered. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing briefly. "I could ask you the same thing." When I opened my eyes, he was looking at me like I was something precious. Something worth protecting. Something worth keeping. Not a maid. Not a servant. Not a joke or a target or invisible. Just Agnes.
Just me.
"Stay," he said quietly. It wasn't a command.
It was a request.
Maybe even a plea. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. And in that moment, in his office with blood on both our hands and danger still echoing in the walls, something shifted between us. Something deep. Something permanent. Something neither of us would ever let go. Charles summoned me to his office at noon the next day, his voice tight when he spoke through the door. "Come in, Agnes. And stay close to me." I entered to find the room transformed. 5 men stood in a semicircle around Charles's desk, all wearing expensive suits and expressions carved from stone. The air was thick with tension, with barely restrained violence. Mafia lieutenants. I recognized Marcus, the one who'd sneered at me weeks ago. The others were strangers, but their eyes held the same cold calculation. Charles sat behind his desk, perfectly composed, but I could read the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't a friendly meeting. "Gentlemen," he said coolly, "this is Agnes. She works for me." "We can see that," Marcus said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Which is precisely why we're here." I moved to the corner, trying to make myself small, invisible. But Charles gestured to the chair beside his desk. "Sit, Agnes." Every eye in the room turned to me. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, my pulse racing. "Charles." An older man stepped forward, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. "We need to discuss your judgment lately." "My judgment is sound, Vincent." "Is it?" Vincent's gaze flickered to me, dismissive. "You've been distracted."
Soft.
"Making decisions that put sentiment above strategy." "I've made no such decisions." "Haven't you?" Marcus moved closer, his voice rising. "You've allowed a maid into your private office. Given her privileges no servant has ever had. Defended her publicly. Protected her from discipline." "She cleans my office," Charles said flatly. "That's not a crime." "It's a weakness," Vincent countered. "One your enemies will exploit. One that makes you look foolish in front of the families." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was about me. They were challenging Charles because of me. "The men are talking," another lieutenant added, "saying you've gone soft, that a woman has clouded your judgment." "Then the men are fools," Charles said, his voice dangerous. "Are they?" Vincent leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk. "When was the last time you made a decision without considering her? When was the last time you acted like the Don we followed for 15 years? My capabilities haven't changed, but your priorities have." Marcus circled around, moving closer to where I sat. "She's a distraction, Charles. A liability. And liabilities get people killed." My hands trembled in my lap. I should leave. Should excuse myself. This conversation was too big, too dangerous for someone like me. But Charles's voice stopped me before I could move. "Agnes stays." "That's the problem," Vincent said coldly. "You can't see past her to what's good for the organization. What's good for the organization is my decision to make. Not when it affects all of us," Marcus snapped. He was standing directly beside my chair now, looming. "This little maid has made you weak. Made you vulnerable. It ends today." Before I could react, his hand shot out and grabbed my arm, yanking me to my feet. "Let go," I started. The sound of a gun cocking silenced the room. Charles stood behind his desk, his pistol aimed directly at Marcus's head. His expression was empty.
Cold.
Absolutely lethal. "Let go," he said quietly. "Or lose the hand." Marcus's grip tightened on my arm. "You'd shoot one of your own lieutenants over a maid? Try me." The room had gone deathly silent. Even Vincent had stepped back, his face pale. "Charles." Marcus's voice wavered slightly. "I'm not going to ask again." Charles's finger moved to the trigger.
Let
her go." Marcus released my arm like I'd burned him, stepping back quickly. But something inside me snapped. I'd spent my entire life being invisible, being the joke, being pulled and pushed and dismissed and discarded. I'd let people make decisions for me, about me, without me having any say. Not anymore. I stepped forward, placing myself between Charles's gun and the lieutenant's. My legs shook, but I forced them steady. "Stop," I said. Charles's eyes widened slightly. "Agnes."
No.
My voice came out stronger than I'd ever heard it. I turned to face the men, my heart hammering but my chin raised. "You want to know why I'm here? Why Charles keeps me?" "Agnes, you don't have to," Charles started. "Because I choose to be here," I continued, my voice rising. "Not because he ordered it. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because I choose to stay." Vincent's eyebrows rose. Marcus stared at me like I'd sprouted a second head. "I've spent my entire life being told I'm nothing," I said, the words pouring out now. "Being called weak, worthless, invisible. Being treated like I don't matter. Like I don't exist." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. But Charles sees me, not as a servant, not as a tool, as a person. He's never once made me feel small. Never once treated me like I was beneath him. And you think that makes him weak? I took another step forward. The lieutenant's actually moved back. He runs an empire. He makes decisions that affect hundreds of lives. He carries weight you can't even imagine. And yes, I clean his office. Yes, I bring him tea. Yes, I see him when he's tired and bloodied and human. My voice dropped, but it didn't waver. That doesn't make him weak. It makes him strong enough to be human. Strong enough to let someone care. Strong enough to care back. I turned to Charles. His gun had lowered slightly, his eyes locked on mine with an expression I couldn't read. "I don't stay because you protect me," I said softly. "I stay because you see me. And I see you. And that's worth more than anything they think is important." I turned back to the lieutenants. "So, if you want to remove me, you'll have to go through both of us. Because I'm not leaving. And he's not letting me go." The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent cleared his throat. "Well." His voice was different now. Thoughtful. "Perhaps we've misjudged the situation." Marcus said nothing, but his face had gone pale. Charles set his gun down on the desk slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. Agnes is under my protection. She works for me. She stays because I want her to stay. If anyone has a problem with that, he paused, his gaze sweeping across each man. The door is behind you. No one moved. Are we clear?
Charles asked.
Yes, sir. They murmured one by one. Then get out. They filed out quickly, Marcus not daring to look at me as he passed. The door clicked shut. I stood in the center of the office, my whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. My knees felt weak. My hands trembled. Agnes. I turned. Charles was staring at me with something like awe in his eyes. What you just did was stupid. I finished, my voice shaking. I know.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have interfered. Was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said quietly. I blinked. What? He came around the desk, stopping in front of me. You stood between me and 5 armed men. You defended yourself. Defended us. You weren't afraid. I was terrified, I admitted. But you did it anyway. His hand came up, cupping my cheek the way he had the night before. You chose to stay. You chose me. Of course I did. Why? The question hung between us. I met his eyes, those winter steel eyes that had once frightened me, that now felt like home. Because you chose me first, I whispered, when no one else ever did. Charles pulled me into his arms, holding me against his chest. I could feel his heart racing, matching mine. I've never met anyone like you, he murmured into my hair. You're supposed to be timid, invisible, weak. Maybe I'm not who they thought I was, I said against his chest. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. His arms tightened around me. No, he agreed. You're unbreakable. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The mansion changed after that day. It happened slowly at first, small shifts barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking. But I was looking, and I saw everything. The head housekeeper nodded to me in the hallway. Actually nodded, like I was someone worth acknowledging. The maids who used to mock me fell silent when I passed, their eyes dropping to the floor. Mr. Pemberton stepped aside when I walked toward the east wing, murmuring, Miss Pratt, like the title had always been mine. Even the guards stationed outside Charles's office straightened when they saw me coming, opening the door without question. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer a joke. I was under the protection of Charles Blakemore, and everyone knew what that meant. 3 weeks after the confrontation with the lieutenants, Charles found me in the servants' corridor. I was carrying cleaning supplies, heading toward his office the way I did every morning. Walk with me, he said simply. I blinked. Sir, I need to inspect the north wing. You're coming with me. It wasn't a request. We walked through the mansion together, him in his impeccable charcoal suit, me in my plain maid's uniform. Our footsteps echoed through marble hallways lined with staff who stopped what they were doing to watch us pass. Charles didn't touch me, didn't speak, just walked beside me with his hands in his pockets, his presence like a shield around us both. People bowed their heads as we passed.
To him, I told myself.
They're bowing to him, not me. But Charles's quiet voice corrected that thought. They bow to both of us now, he said, as if reading my mind. You're part of my household. That means something here. I'm still just a maid, I whispered.
No.
He stopped walking, turning to face me. You're not. We stood in the center of the grand hallway, staff frozen around us, pretending not to listen. You're Agnes Pratt, Charles continued quietly. The woman who stood between me and 5 armed men. The woman who chose to stay when anyone else would have run. The woman who sees me as human. My cheeks burned. Charles. You're not just a maid anymore, Agnes. You haven't been for a long time. He resumed walking, and I followed, my heart pounding. We made a circuit of the north wing, him pointing out details that needed attention, me nodding and memorizing. But it wasn't really about the inspection. It was about showing the mansion that I belonged, that he'd chosen me, and that choice was permanent. By the time we returned to his office, my hands had stopped shaking. That afternoon, I cleaned his office the way I had on the very first day. I started with the bookshelves, dusting each spine carefully. Then the windows, polishing them until they gleamed. The tables, the chairs, the lamp with the brass base that always needed extra attention. Finally, I moved to his desk. Charles sat in his chair, watching me work. He'd been watching me the entire time, his paperwork forgotten. "You're staring," I said quietly, running my cloth across the mahogany surface. "I'm memorizing," he corrected. "Memorizing what?"
This. You.
"The way you move. The way you've transformed my office from a tomb into something that feels alive." I paused, my cloth hovering over the desk. "It's just cleaning." "It's never just cleaning with you." He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember the first day they sent you here?" My stomach tightened. How could I forget? "They sent you as a joke," Charles said, his voice quiet but edged with something sharp. "A cruel prank. They wanted to humiliate you, terrify you, break you. I know. I should have sent you away that day. Should have refused to play their game. But I didn't." I looked up, meeting his eyes.
Why? I asked.
Charles stood, moving around the desk until he stood directly in front of me. Close enough that I could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the flecks of gray in his dark hair, the way his jaw worked when he was choosing his words carefully. "Because you didn't run," he said simply. "Everyone runs from me eventually. But you walked into my office, terrified and trembling, and you stayed. You worked. You didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't try to use your fear to manipulate me. You just stayed." "I needed the job," I whispered. "It was more than that." His hand came up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You saw me having a rage, and you brought me water. You saw me covered in blood, and you cleaned my wounds. You stood between me and my own men and told them you chose to stay." My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. "They sent you to mock me," Charles continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I thank them for their stupidity, because they gave me you." "You didn't need to keep me," I said, my voice breaking. Charles's thumb brushed across my cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I didn't keep you, Agnes." His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "You stayed. All on your own. You chose this. Chose me. Even when it was dangerous. Even when it made no sense. You stayed. Because you're worth staying for," I whispered. Something in his expression cracked. The careful control, the calculated coldness, the armor he wore against the world. For just a moment I saw the man underneath.
Raw.
Vulnerable. Human. "Say it again," he murmured. "You're worth staying for," I repeated, stronger this time. "You're worth choosing. You're worth seeing." Charles pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me like I was something precious. Something he'd fight to keep. "They wanted to break you," he said into my hair. "Instead, you taught me how to feel again. How to be something other than a weapon." I pressed my face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "You taught me how to stand," I whispered back. "How to be brave. How to choose myself." We stood there in his office, the place where it had all begun, where a cruel joke had transformed into something neither of us had expected. Something real. Something permanent. Something unbreakable. Charles pulled back just enough to look at me, his hand cupping my face. "I'm never letting you go," he said quietly. "Even if you wanted to leave, which you won't, I wouldn't let you." "Good." I smiled through my tears. "Because I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." "I promise." He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. We breathed the same air, shared the same space, existed in the same moment. Two broken souls who'd found each other in the cruelest way possible, and made something beautiful from it. I returned to dusting his desk, and Charles returned to his paperwork. But everything had changed. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of choice, of promises kept and futures built. Later, as the sun set and painted his office in shades of gold, I set down my cloth and looked at the man who'd chosen me when no one else ever had. the man I'd chosen back. And I thought about that first day, walking toward his door like walking toward death, trembling and afraid, and certain I wouldn't survive. They'd set me to break me. But I'd learned how to stand. And he'd learned how to feel. And neither of us would ever let go.